So I've got this big pile of lumber behind me as well as these floats, and I got to turn the combination of these into a floating dock. And the first thing I need to do is cut the wood to the length according to my plans. So here we go. Now, based on the size of the floats I have will determine on how big I should make this dock. These are Carolina Waterworks floats. These are called the D700s. They're rated for supposedly about 700 pounds a piece. That limits how big I can build this dock based on these 4 floats alone. What I'm going to do is make my dock about 8 feet by 11 feet long. That's actually going to put me a little bit over the weight recommendations of Carolina Waterworks, but I think it should be fine. All right, to make my cuts, what I did is I took 2 boards that need to be cut to the same length, stacked them on top of each other. And what this will do is a couple things. One, it will show me that the boards aren't the same length to begin with, and they're actually, if you look closely here, you'll see that sometimes the lumberyard cuts aren't exactly square. Line the 2 boards up, screw them temporarily in place with the screw, then I'll come back and I'm going to use my speed square to help guide my saw to make a clean cut. That will cut the first board and it'll leave the mark in the same exact spot to make the cut on the second board. Okay, so now I've got all the lumber cut, got everything on the dock. I'm gonna go ahead and build the framing on the dock, then I'll put it in the water, then I'll do the decking. So at this point, what I do is start organizing the wood. Basically, I'm gonna take my outside boards and make the rectangular perimeter. I'm gonna have a 2x8 and a 2x6 on the perimeter. Okay, so here's an example of what our corner will look like. This is the outside trim board, if you wanna call it. This is 2x8. These are 2x6s. This is kind of how the corner will look. And so basically, I've got to screw this board to this board. I'm gonna use stainless screws to do that. And what this will do is allow us a spot for our Carolina Waterworks float to sit on top of that. So essentially what we're doing is we're actually building the dock upside down right now. I've got the perimeter frame set up, ready to go. Again, a 2x6 attached to the 2x8. That's gonna make the edge of the dock very beefy, but it's also gonna give us a little recess to allow that 2x8 to hide the rim of the floats. And I think it will look just a little bit nicer. Now I'm going to attach it all together to create the exterior rectangle, and I'm just going to use 3.5-inch screws now. That's going to kind of hold it together temporarily. That way I can adjust it for square later, and then I'll come back with some big beefy brackets that will stiffen up the joints. Now what I'm going to do is check for squareness by running diagonals. Basically, if I run a tape from this corner to that corner, should get the same measurement if I run the tape from this corner to that corner. All right, so we're getting a measurement of about 157 for both diagonals. That means we are square. If for some reason these measurements were different corner to corner, then we'd be a little bit out of square and we would have to rack this to square it up. But we are sitting good here. Go ahead and we'll put the floats in next, and those will help further square it up. I'm gonna bring in this stringer to mark the floats. All right, I just realized I actually made a mistake. I started trying to fit my internal stringers, they weren't fitting, and I thought I cut them right, and I about went and cut them all again. And what I realized is when I did my seam here, since I've got that stair-step joint, I just kind of butted the board together, but I did it backwards. I had it like this, and I need it like this. There we go, makes a big difference. So I'm just reattaching my corners here on this side, and then we should be good. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm running one of the inside stringer boards, and this is the board that will line up with the other end of the float. I'm gonna use these 5.5-inch deck screws, and they're kind of a temporary hold. Eventually we're gonna come back with these bigger brackets and tie it off that way. But for now, just use these. Okay, so to attach my floats to the framing, I'm going to use 1/2-inch lags and washers. So I marked my spots where they'll go, so I'm going to go ahead and pre-drill now. Then I'll put the floats back on and we can attach the floats. Okay, this started to get heavy, so I decided to go ahead and flip it over before I put all the floats on. It was a little dicey. So now that it's flipped over, I'm gonna go ahead and lag bolt the floats into the frame. Now, unfortunately, I did pre-drill the holes for the lags when this thing was upside down, but it's still gonna be more of a pain in the butt to put them in this way, but I figure this was the lesser of the two evils versus trying to move this dock when it was too heavy. Flipping it upside down would have probably been tough with all the floats, so I just gotta put the lags in this way now. Okay, there we go. Got one to bite, sockets to do this. Now, to attach these floats to the frame, I'm using 1/2-inch lags. These are 4 inches long, and I'm using a combination of an impact drill with a 3/4 socket, as well as a hand wrench and socket. You gotta be a little careful when you're driving these. You don't wanna over tighten them. These are plastic, so you don't wanna smush it too much. So I just generally go most of the way with this, and then maybe do the last few turns with this. If you go full bore with this, it might drive it down too much, and you don't want to damage the attachment point. Now, one of the things to think about when you build a floating dock like this is that over time it's going to get beat up in the water. You're going to have boat waves, weather waves, those kind of things. It's going to get beat up. Something to really help keep it together are corner brackets like this. This is an inside corner. This is an outside corner. Goes in like that. We use carriage bolts to go through, bolt them together, and that really beefs up the integrity of a floating dock. These are the Carolina Waterworks models. Pretty cool, real beefy. They look like they're at least 1/4 inch thick, and they just really beef up the joint. That's really gonna help keep this floating dock stable over the long term. And I also came back and put these brackets on too. It's just an angle bracket, face plate, another backer plate here. I put them on these main stringers just to beef things up a little bit more. Okay, so this is as far as I want to go before I put it in the water, because this is getting very heavy and it's going to be hard to get in the water if I put too much more weight on it. And what I've done here is I've put temporary slide boards underneath, and that's what these ratchet straps are for, and that should help us slide it in the water, hopefully. So I'm actually waiting for a full moon high tide. We're going to try to slide this in. It's pretty heavy, so I'm a little nervous about it. Okay, so it is game day. So I'm trying to drop this thing in now while the water is high, so the dock doesn't have to fall as far. So here we go. It's pretty heavy. Good deal. It's floating. All right, so I'm pretty excited about these. These are custom made by Carolina Waterworks, and they're nice. They're super robust, and they have these bushings, if you want to call them that actually slide around the pole. And this is a 10-inch one that's designed for about an 8-inch pole. So I'm going to put them on temporarily, because with these flanges, they're actually intended to go on over the deck. I'm using stainless hardware for this, because this is aluminum. The stainless and aluminum plays nice together. Now, before I start decking, I need to go ahead and put a couple more stringer boards in here to minimize this space. I'm using 2x4 material for the decking, and so I got to keep my span between these boards less than 24 inches. Obviously, that's bigger here, so that's all these boards are doing, is minimizing that distance to keep the deck boards from warping over time is the idea. So what I'm going to do to put these in, I'm just going to stand them up vertically, drop them in. I've got them centered. I'm just going to use these 5-inch deck screws to go through my double 2x here into here, and then the decking screws themselves will hold us in place over time. Right, so I'm ready for decking now. I'm going to start the first board and basically line it up with the edge of this and the edge of that, and then I'll follow each board after that, and that should keep me pretty square since this frame is square. And what I'm going to do, so I'm just going to put 2 screws in for now, 1 on each side. I'm going to pre-drill my holes because I'm using recycled stainless screws. Sometimes they're a little soft. But again, I'm going to start and put 1 screw on each side, go ahead and deck everything out. I've got to kind of work around my piling mounts as well. Then once I get everything decked out, I'll come back and screw the whole deck down. These Carolina Waterworks piling guides sit on top of the deck, and since I already put them on, it's a little bit tricky to come back. I gotta slide the wood underneath, hopefully I've got enough space, and then drill my holes, and then come back and put these 1/2-inch stainless carriage bolts, as well as a washer and nut. I kind of do these bolts one at a time, get one in, tighten it, just because I can't get my hands under here to tighten it. So again, drill the hole, put this in, tighten it down, then move on to the next board. Down to my last 2 deck boards, and all I'm doing right now is I'm putting 2 screws, one on each edge, to get the deck boards in place. When I get these last 2 down, I'll come back and screw the entire decking down, and I'm using 3-inch stainless screws, and I actually recycled these from a demolition project, and they're in great shape, so I'm going to reuse them. 2 more boards, and we'll have ourselves a functional dock. The last thing I need to do is screw the rest of this deck down. I'm gonna chalk some lines so I make sure I hit those stringers and the screw line looks good. I need to trim the edges. I'm just gonna use a circular saw to do that.
I love it, yeah.
Cool,
I should come here every now and then.
Kid approved.
Hmm?
We're exploring our creek on the canoe for the first time after building our floating dock.
Hey, look, we can see the osprey net. You almost flipped this over.
No.
Really
Coming in hot, guys.
No, I don't want to come in hot. Or we're
Coming in
gonna
hot.
sink.